huge. It's
still
yeah,
waiting for
and then there,
179.
I would assume the deer liver.
Because that's the generic number I put out there.
Yeah,
Just-
that's
I saw like 4 or 5 of them.
there too, but
Driving house out of there. There was one who left the facility.
either one.
Walked our car. A couple.
I just want to make sure.
I used to play
You know,
basketball.
as I said, I got to put out there, but it would take me 5 minutes to take it back down.
Yeah.
If you said, get it off there. I just figured, you know, the more I can put out there, the less phone calls that are coming in, like the
For
little,
you,
yeah,
yeah.
the less
Yes.
small phone calls.
If they actually know what they're-
And you text them?
Exactly.
No.
And
A
so,
lot of times they don't scroll all the way, but.
well, and it's not about thinking, or talking to OIT and see if they can move our meeting minutes to a different, you know, the website. Because it makes no sense that meeting minutes wouldn't be under like opinions and decisions. That if I want to see the outcome of something or the decision of something, I think it should be under that section, but no, it's under about us. And so I don't know why they put it there, why they insisted it be put there. So I don't know if it's just a little tricky for some people to find. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
I put it under opinions and decisions. We've got our decision data out there. That's basically our database. We've got, you know, our advisory opinions that have been issued, and you would think, well, here's the minutes and all the cases that have been before us in the same section.
You still doing our kind of depositions?
Mhm.
We are, it comes in cycles, but right now we're required to use a service called Magna.
Okay,
And I
I've
think
heard of them. Mhm.
Range is trying to outsource as much as possible to reduce. So now when we request settlement checks, everything goes through this company out in California.
Okay.
They're outsourcing all their subrogation. And it's interesting because I get these court reporters and I'll be in Columbus and I'll get a court reporter from Akron. I'm like, you drove down here for this? And that's who they hired.
Yeah.
It can't save the money, but they're writing one check as opposed to having to
Sure.
write all multiple checks.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll get calls from those reporters.
Do you?
Can you take this? I can't drive there. No. I have to do that. Aren't these-
She knows we start at 11, right? That sounds like a Saturday morning. That's exactly what I'm doing. We play basketball on Saturday mornings. We start at 8, guys show up at 8:15, 8:20, we're like, you know, we start at 8, right? That's like they want us, there's really a general hard push for us to use minority vendors, which we're more than willing to do. But considering.
Just stay.
Yeah.
Well.
It might be easier for you to sit around this way.
Where are you going, that way or? Our budget is.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get out of the way and I get.
There's no getting out of my way, unfortunately.
Looking forward to.
Well, my life, and move over here.
The opposite flavor, which we saw that last week, right? Well, but then okay, where do they get their?
Yes.
Minority quote?
Send me what you have on these.
And there's nobody here local.
Absolutely.
I can't squeeze in anymore.
Yeah.
They've sent everything. or-
They have.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we get out of here, we'll send you complaint responsibilities.
I'm not looking until I said. What they did, you do.
I will send you what we have.
Thank you. Essentially true. I was gonna give you more time, but Scott was pushing.
Now, are you going to be counsel for respondent?
I'm trying to represent the Scott.
We'll call you.
Okay.
We always thought we might, let's get it to know yesterday. He was tired, he was kind of concerned about how much we need. I said,
We get distracted.
said, this month is an aberration,
Yeah.
3.
Okay, just FYI, before we get started, this Kaufman just emailed me. They're not sure where they are in some part, but you can be updated. So, just to give you a heads up. And I give you other information, just to say. Kathy, I'm sure it is. Lunch has been ordered and Chris is going to take pretty much tray at about it.
Guys,
Pardon me?
guys,
No, it's not, he's leaving it.
come on. Bro, we also matter. You're tired of this room.
That's not.
That's fine.
You can have it.
All of them.
It's in there. It's in there.
Well, okay. I mean, it was, I said, I don't know. Just, okay.
Did you meet next meeting, December second?
No, this is called December 16th. This is called, Bill forgot to do an outline. I want that copy from the last meeting. Or 18 days.
I knew there was next.
Copy that quickly. Because I already have a computer up here. Ah,
Gee.
so quickly went down and got this. So the next meeting is not last Thursday.
Backwards and,
I'm
It's code.
ready if you are, Catherine's ready.
I'm not ready. I was ready, then I walked in.
Now open this meeting of the Ohio Elections Commission.
I will take the roll. Mr. Bromer?
here,
Ms. Tavares?
Here.
Mr. Norman?
here,
Ms. Cunningham?
Here.
Chair, Vice Chair, Chair Beatty.
Here.
First thing to reflect is, as he has been consistently recusing himself from consideration of this matter, Mr. Kreitz is not present where he would be, since he wouldn't be able to take part. I think it was beneficial to him to spend time coming down here, and he decided to not come, only to open a meeting and then leave, which I think is a smart thing to do. And as you are all aware, I won't go into great detail, but Ms. Kaufman has had a personal family issue arise in the last day or so, and so she will not be able to attend today's meeting as well.
Is there a motion to excuse Commissioner Kaufman from today's meeting?
And we have to do Commissioner Craig's as well.
As
No,
well. I would.
other than the fact that he doesn't have to be here, I would move to excuse both Chair Kreitz and Ms. Kaufman.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the only matter up for consideration today is the deliberations on the hearing that was concluded on November 18th, Hicks versus Freeman et al., wherein the complaint asserted that the respondent did not provide complete information, essentially not in complete information in campaign finance reports. The commission heard all of the evidence, testimony, et cetera, over 3 consecutive meetings. Initially, the commission decided that it would deliberate at a subsequent time after the November 18th meeting was closed. Subsequently, it was brought to the commission's attention that such private deliberations would not fit within the commission's rare statutory scheme, wherein both meetings and hearings of the commission are obligated to be subject to Ohio's open meetings law. And so the commission decided to set this matter for today for that consideration of deliberations on that case. And this goes from there.
Mr. Executive Director, before we proceed with the deliberations, we'd like to speak to the deliberation as to the members of the audience may speak, non-speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for speaking over you there. Generally speaking, when the commission takes its matters under deliberation, if it has any questions that it wants to ask of someone, certainly the commission has the ability to do so. But generally, this is a time for the commission members to express their respective opinions and not have any additional input from either any party or council. Again, unless the commission members have a specific question they would like to see answered. But again, repeating myself, this is a deliberation for the commission members to take and to express their respective opinions on the case and come to some sort of a resolution on how to proceed, whether to make a full and final determination today or whether to give sufficient instruction to me to put in writing the commission's expected decision on the case that would be finalized on at the commission's next meeting on December 16th.
I'll just say, I think that's why we had given ourselves a week so that we could put this in writing, because I think it's a fairly important matter that I think it needs to be put down in writing and then considered and prepared for our next meeting, which is on the 16th, instead of waiting until the 15th.
Just to clarify that, do you believe that you should have a motion to that right now?
I don't think we need to do that right now. I think we should deliberate and then we can discuss it at the end.
I would say
Meant that we've already may had some kind of agreement that that's what we want to do, but okay.
no. I think we're fine. Just beginning to commence deliberations, however the commission wishes to do so.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear from the executive director the violations being considered if burden of proof and standards were to apply.
Standard is easy. It's simply the preponderance of the evidence. There's nothing, nothing more involved in that. It's even a false statement case where we're obligated to meet a higher standard. So it's just the preponderance of the evidence. The issues before the commission are related to statutes 3517 10D2, asserting that the treasurer of the campaign committee did not keep a strict account of all contributions received or expenditures made. 3517 13B, a failure to file a complete and accurate campaign failure to file complete and accurate campaign finance reports. And there are also assertions that there was improper corporate activity in violation of the revised code section 3599.3. Those were the essential allegations contained in the complaint. The commission obviously heard a variety of evidence and testimony over the weeks on probably more the first two issues than the third, but those are the issues before the commission. As it relates to the authority of the commission, certainly we can find no violation. We can find a violation. If a violation is found, then we have the option available of imposing some sort of a fine sanction. As the fines are laid out and the penalty provisions provided, of not less than $15 or more than $100 a day for the campaign finance reports, corporate contribution activity up to $5,000, or we could find that there's good cause present not to impose a fine or refer the matter for further prosecution. This is not a case in which the commission, I would say the commission is historically referred for prosecution. Unlike when the commission was looking into a case involving Travis Elkins that was back in March and April. I don't know that this could this case rises to the level of having that kind of a finding, in my opinion.
For the non-lawyers, the preponderance of the evidence means just tip the scale. So if you got the scales here and there's enough here to tip it, that means it's not like a criminal case.
The old 51 to 49%
Yes, indeed.
standard.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe I can start this off, our deliberations here. Like everyone else sitting here, sat through days of hearings. We saw volumes of exhibits. We had the exhibits to take home after the 18th and an opportunity to review all the exhibits. I agree that with Mr. Norman that this is an important case. The issue that gave rise to this case is, I think, extremely important for the state of Ohio. I jotted down some issues or some facts that I think are relevant, at least from my perspective. The facts that we heard throughout the hearing established that a certain amount of campaign advertising for Mr. Freeman was paid for by someone other than Mr. Freeman's campaign. Mr. Freeman acknowledged that he participated in the development of the ads, as did others involved in the Freeman campaign. Mr. Freeman agreed that his campaign did not pay for many of those ads. Invoice evidence established that strategic media billed constant content for advertising buys for the Freeman campaign. That was contained in Hicks Exhibit 13. In some cases, the smaller invoices were stamp paid, while the larger ones were not. We saw all that. In a statement from the committee to elect Allen Freeman, acknowledgement was made that invoices totaling $137,982.81 for advertisements for Freeman Allen was received on April 9th, 2021. That's contained in Hicks Exhibit 19. In this statement, the Freeman campaign also acknowledged they did on April 3rd, 2020, receive an invoice via email from Constant Content for $290,744.63. Mr. Freeman testified that he never saw it, and Ms. Jones testified that she was told it should be disregarded. Mr. Bray, in his closing statement, stated that a violation most likely occurred, but my client should not be held responsible because a bill was not provided. Essentially, because a bill was not provided. And it's my opinion that the question before this commission is the Ohio Election Commission has unrefuted evidence that a third party paid for advertising on behalf of the Freeman campaign. Should the defense, we don't know what we owe for the broadcast ads that ran in the name of the campaign committee, allow this and future committees to circumvent the requirements of RC 3617-13B and RC 3517-10D2. To me, that's the question before this commission. Does that allow circumvention of those statutes, simply saying we never got a bill?
And I will piggyback on what you said, because I know Mr. Bry argued throughout the course of this hearing that you can't pay what you don't know. But in this case, at least the treasurer for the campaign knew of an invoice for $290,000. There's no paper trail to contest that they don't have to pay that. Allegedly, there was one phone call by Mr. Freeman that came back unresponded to, but I also had the treasurer who didn't open up Exhibit X, which was the detail for that, didn't bother to even look at it, and yet Mr. Freeman had a balance of $96,707.92 in his account. It would seem to me that if you have gone through the efforts to put your face out in front of commercials, to create commercials, and you know the commercials are running, you know the radio spots are running, and you know somebody is paid for them, I think it's incumbent to determine who And at a minimum, you respond by making a filing, which was Exhibit W, saying, here's the invoice. And if you later determine that's not accurate, then you go back and supplement your report and you change. But I don't think you can bury your head in the sand and say, I don't know, so I'm not going to do anything.
As a former candidate, I would totally agree with both gentlemen. You have a responsibility as a candidate to know who is contributing to your campaign. You have a treasurer, but if you receive an invoice and you participated in the production of those commercials, and you know that many commercials were aired, and it was going to be about the amount of those invoices, you have a responsibility to either pay or find out who paid for those invoices.
Because in this instance, we know it wasn't the Ohio Republican Party because he was not the endorsed candidate.
Correct.
Anyone else have anything else to add? What about the violation of 3599.03, improper corporate activity?
I'm not sure there was evidence to support it. At least that would be my opinion.
And is that because, is that because through the evidence that was presented, we really didn't truly get an understanding who ultimately paid these bills? Because even though some of these other organizations pay these bills, we know they not just pay for their health. The money had to come from some other place, which we didn't hear any evidence towards where ultimately we paid this. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I would further that, I think if we're talking about what's before us, whoever paid those bills is not currently before us. It's only the campaign committee was Mr. Freeman.
Any more discussion? This time we'll take any on that particular point, improper corporate activity.
I agree with what was stated.
Likewise, I don't think that we can pursue that simply because there was no evidence submitted. But I still believe that as far as the other issue involving the two statutes, I certainly think if the standard is a preponderance, we have met that standard. Mr. Hicks has met that standard.
I agree with what's been said. I don't even know, for improper corporate activity that we even have a party before us that's been accused of that.
There are, I was gonna say, the way the statute reads, there are certain responsibilities to that the candidate and or the campaign committee has if they receive certain corporate contributions. Yes, I think that's under B, which is where we are. Generally speaking, the 35 speaks to what a corporation can or can't do.
What's the language of B?
Just read it. It says no officer, no stockholder, or no attorney, agent of a corporation or nonprofit corporation, no member or labor party.
Is a PAC considered a corporation?
No.
No.
So the parties we have before us now are the candidate Allen Freeman and a PAC.
Right.
So I don't think we have a proper party here where we can allege improper corporate activity.
I don't even see how it was alleged, no honesty. be nice if it was cited, but
Well, here's where it is. If you look at B, no candidate, political party official, or other individual shall knowingly aid, advise, solicit, or receive money or other property in violation of A1. So that's how it would come into play here. But I would tend to agree there hasn't been any evidence to support that aspect of the statute. You're right, but B1 starts off with no officer, stockholder, attorney, or agent. You know, but then it does include a candidate. So that's how it's invoked. That's why it's before us.
was there evidence of an incorporation?
Content.
Yeah.
GPL LLC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think there were assertions. I think there were assertions by Mr. Hicks as it related to,
But no, those were the pack.
But do we have proof who paid it? We don't have.
Yeah, that was my point about JLL or what those names are, whatever. They're not the ultimate payer.
But they did.
Somebody
They've
paid
been written,
it.
no, I didn't say that they didn't write. But money had to come from another place into them to pay out.
Oh, because they were back.
Well, whatever to be in it.
Well, they weren't back.
no, GPL, they were
They're
corporated.
corporations, so they paid it.
GPL's an LLC, is it not?
I think the answer.
No, I agree that they wrote it. They could wrote the check. But if I'm company A, I'm not, they're consultants, they're this, they're that, whatever. They're getting money from another client or from somewhere else to pay that particular bill. They're not paying it for their benefit.
I understand what Otto's saying.
Yeah.
However, on the record, they paid.
That's a defense maybe for them, but
Yeah,
But they're not, at the same point, they're
They're
not
not
before us.
right.
They're not before us, so it's an interesting assertion, but that's all it is at this point.
The, one of the exhibits pretty much clarifies what JPL is. JPL and Associates is a full-service political consulting firm located in Columbus, Ohio. So it's classified as a full-service firm.
Well, and the actual name of it is JPL Associates, LLC, so it's actually a corporation.
Well, technically a limited liability company and not a corporation. It's covered by 359903. Because 359903 only deals with 1701, 1702. Old-fashioned standard corporations. The statute has never been expanded to take in anything beyond that.
Even though they enjoy the same status in the state of Ohio.
Even though they enjoy the same status in the state of Ohio, and in some regards probably a higher status in this day and age. The statute has never been updated to cover them.
Well, I don't know if we're at the stage, I don't know if we need a motion, or if we say, Phil, we think that there's a violation by failing to file a complete and accurate statement required under 35-1710 of the revised code. I don't know if we have to take that for a vote before us, for those that came here today, or how we proceed.
do we need to make specific findings associated with what it was? That's what we're talking about, for reaching a decision, I think.
I'll just interject and say, I mean, we could go either way with it in terms of how it's corrected. If you guys want to say, here are some of the findings, et cetera, that we think are important and critical for us to, to be prepared to make a decision. I can certainly put them into a writing of some sort, and then circulate that to everybody for their respective approvals, and then be prepared to act on that at next Thursday's meeting. Alternatively, if you want to go ahead and say we find a violation of 10 and 13, and here are the things that we think are most critical and appropriate for you to include in your writing, I can do that as well, because that's kind of what we did with Elkins, just going back to that particular case. In the past, we probably more historically made a decision, and then as an outgrowth of that decision, I've put something into writing.
I know, as we were speaking, I saw you taking notes, you got the salient points that we were addressing.
Trying to.
I think it probably is most prudent that we have you put it into writing, circulate it, and then we're prepared to address this and have everybody sign it or be prepared to approve it at our next meeting. I guess that leaves the next thing to us is, do we want to move on to talk about the penalty phase?
Well, I think we should. I think that should be part of the letter that Bill drafts. What we, in fact, I thought that was going to be the eventual outcome of today's meeting, that we would deliberate and then come up with a finding. And that part of that finding would be penalty.
Right, I think, from my perspective, I think the findings affect the penalty. I mean, I sort of have trouble jumping over it to the penalty without a general discussion about the findings and what affirmative obligations and what they might have and what was and what it had. Or maybe it's just a pure numbers game, which is fine.
Give us your thoughts.
Well, I mean, what we're saying is that a candidate can't bury their head in the sand. They have some affirmative obligation to do something. Somebody does, whether it's a candidate or the treasurer.
Or a combination.
Or a combination. And Phil, is that something that, do we have the history or administrative rules and statutory basis, common law decisions on that issue? Is this an issue of first impression for us?
To this extent, I'd say this is an issue of first impression. If you look at the statutory scheme, generally speaking, treasurers have the greatest responsibility as it relates to dealing with the contributions and expenditures of the campaign committee. And, it should be repeated that the treasurer is not specifically before us because she wasn't included. Now, the campaign committee is, but the treasurer was not included as a respondent in this case. Generally speaking, a candidate, a candidate appoints a treasurer and the treasurer takes on that responsibility. I have to look at what, what the interplay is with, how responsible, let's say, a candidate is, because we have heard a variety of testimonies that, in this case in particular, where the treasurer or the candidate more or less said there was not going to be any expenditure of funds, et cetera, unless it was approved by me. So we have that kind of evidence that was, before us, presented to us from not just from the candidate, but from a variety of sources that said, this was the authority, the hierarchy, however you want to look at it. So I mean, there is that has to come into play. Off the top of my head, because there was that admission, I think there could be some liability and responsibility placed on the candidate. But again, the primary person responsible for a committee's activity is the treasurer.
And I put on the flip side, he's aware of a $290,000 invoice, makes one phone call, does nothing else, and yet he's got $96,000 sitting in his account. If it worked for good old pesky Mr. Hicks, we'd be all sitting, he'd be sitting there fat, dumb, and happy, and nobody'd be checking him. And it just seems that this is kind of the case where if this is what, we can set an example because you don't want people continuing to do this kind of stuff.
And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but throughout these hearings we've had on this case, there never was disagreement that a third party paid for these ads and that the Freeman campaign did not pay for them. I mean, this is truly a violation hiding in plain sight. And
He knew they were running.
Right.
Well, if I take it back one step, this is kind of like, and excuse my language here, this is kind of like campaign in a box. hey, you wanna run? We need somebody down for this area. Whoop, we supply this to you, this to you, this to you. And you just go out there and do a little bit of this. And that's, RJ Mancini, okay? Who paid him? I don't know who paid him. I don't know. He just came down. This person was there. I don't know why they were there. Okay, I saw him this time. It was all these type of things, and I understand that that's how some things work or whatever, but I go back to your point is maybe these are how things are gonna work, but there maybe should be some responsibility to not just say, hey, they got it all taken care of me. I'm taken care of for me, as opposed to you ought to have some proactive knowledge of what's going on, really be, engaged and involved in your campaign with a certain level of knowledge, not just, show up where they say show up.
It would be different to me if this was a first-time candidate who was naive, but this guy said he'd been in politics for 20 years.
As a consultant, campaign manager, et cetera, as well as a candidate.
And I don't think at least I'm not in my mind looking at the householder Mancini that maybe the party paid for him to come down and do some door knocking. That's not an issue for me. But when you know that you have put yourself out there to create ads and you put yourself out there where you're showing up for shoots to create commercials, and those commercials and those radio ads are running, and you still to this day have no idea who paid for them and have done nothing to do it, to me, that's just wrong.
Well, and you also know that they don't run until they're paid for. I mean, none of that's running
That's
until
the
they're paid for
point.
in advance. Like, to me, that's significant, because if you have any experience in politics and ads, you know that they're not on there unless somebody wrote a check. And if you know it's not your campaign, then somebody is. Now, I'm not sure about the amount on that. There seemed to be some discrepancy as to whether or not it was attributed or not, or a valid amount, or just an invoice, and there's some discussion about records being sealed, but certainly the evidence was that there was an invoice for that amount. And a lot of discussion about whether or not it was a valid amount or way over the top because of the amount for a local campaign of a campaign in the box, as our chair says.
The other point is the candidate himself, along with the campaign team, said that they talked frequently, and authorization came from the candidate to spend the money. So he was intimately involved. It wasn't as if he was a first-time candidate, everything was done for him. He didn't sign off on any of the activities and the expenditures. And then what I keep going back to is the invoice coming in, an attachment, but nobody opened the attachment. That's unbelievable to me.
See, that doesn't, because when an invoice comes in through QuickBooks, the amount is sitting out there. And many times people know, by their gut, hey, this is wrong. I mean, I've done it myself in my own businesses or whatever. This is wrong. I don't need to open the attachment. I know it's wrong. They came back and said hey, what is this all about? This is wrong. Hey, disregard it. Now, I'm not absolving them of anything, but this issue of opening versus not opening or whatever, that doesn't trouble me as much that he did not open it. He kicked that thing for
I look at it and I go, his treasurer didn't bother to open it when you see an invoice for 300,000? To me, it's just beyond belief and unfathomable. Because if you're running that kind of campaign to go, all of a sudden I'm getting it for $300,000 invoice, and you're not seeing what the detail is, that to me, I just find it impossible to believe. And the first time they opened it is a few weeks before we have our hearing.
I don't find it as impossible to believe as I struggle with the fact that it's maybe it's an outrageous amount and it's too much, but to actually do absolutely nothing about it, or when somebody paid something for something. Where it falls apart for me is whether they opened it or not. If the amount is outrageous, some amounts do. Some things do. And somebody has to pay for it, and to just say, I didn't bother following up because the bill was too high.
Never heard from it again.
I never heard from it again. I never followed up again, but I know I was in the ads and I was responsible. And as long as nobody sends me an in-kind contribution, I'm good. because I didn't get a bill and I don't have to do anything. There's where it falls apart for me is,
I-
I'm less offended by that, because I can understand, like auto, when you get a bill, you just know that it's totally crazy. I mean, I do that too, when I call people and say, hey, this can't be right.
But if I got that bill and said, this can't be right, I would certainly be opening it up to go, what's the detail? How the hell did they get to $290,000 and what are they really alleging here? Especially when I've spent $14,000 out of my campaign and I've got $96,000 sitting there.
Well, for me, the other part was that the 290,000, a large sum, but we had testimony at some of the hearing dates where from people that worked in Mr. Freeman's campaign, that they knew the ads were running in one of the most expensive ad buys in the state of Ohio. And I have to think Mr. Freeman knew that also. He is experienced. And so when you know you have that kind of exposure in an expensive market, you have to believe that that's going to be very top dollar. I guess what, I get the defense that we never got a bill, but I would certainly hate to see that become precedent in the state of Ohio.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, the approach could have been, well, if the parties knew that they were gonna take care of the bill, maybe they would have never sent it at all.
Still, as we start to address, I guess what we would say would be a fine as opposed to a referral for further prosecution. If we were to find against Mr. Freeman, that's something he would have to pay individually as opposed to coming out of his PAC money, correct?
Depends on who the finding is against and how you phrase it. Generally speaking, when we, and this is very generally speaking, when we've made a finding and imposed a fine, and yeah, I'm probably leaning more on the $1,500 amounts. It's a joint and several finding. And so wherever the money comes from, the commission's always looked at it as so be it. Even if Joe, the plumber down the street, gives us a check for $50, if it's payment for that, that's fine. We have had cases where we have said, similar to Elkins actually, where we've said this fine is against this person and that person needs to pay it.
Well, in Elkins, we didn't actually find a fine. We referred it for further prosecution, didn't we?
Well,
Yeah,
we imposed fines against
His mom.
his treasurer, and the committee.
But the treasurer was a party in that one, and it's not in this one.
Correct, agreed. So that's why I'm saying it that way, only because generally when, if we've got a typical, somebody's 5 days late in filing a campaign finance report, we impose a fine of $50, and we have the candidate, treasurer, and the committee all against us, it's joint and several. And so if the treasurer pays it, if the candidate pays it, if it comes out of the committee, that's all fine for us. So if we're going to look at doing something specific, I would encourage the commission to make it specific so that if you don't want it to come out of the campaign committee, impose it against the candidate individually, impose it just against the campaign committee, and then the money has to come from whichever respective source. And could you, Phil, give us your position on if we find that it should be referred for prosecution? How would that look? What would they be looking at? Who actually paid for the ads? Was there coordination between the campaign and whoever the ad buyers were, if you will? I'm a little leery to speak as to what a prosecutor would do, but all we would be sending to the prosecutor's office is obviously all the records from the case and saying the commission found a violation by this candidate and this committee, and that's what's being sent to the prosecutor's office. And then where a prosecutor would go from there, I don't, I think they would only be looking at the people that we send. Historically, that's been the case whenever we've sent a matter for prosecution. I don't know if I want to say this one's a little different because it's maybe a little, but not much.
It doesn't have the same teeth as Elkins.
Right. And also, if you look back at what the commission had previously really referred, it was situations where either I mean, I'm thinking back to where a treasurer more or less stole funds from the other campaign committee, and we referred a matter for prosecution there. It was bundled up with other charges, or a false statement case where, you know, we made a finding and decided to set a matter for prosecution to a prosecutor against that candidate individually. So, you know, what a prosecutor would do, generally speaking, when we send it to them, is deal with the people, the individuals of the committee, whatever, that we sent to them.
Are you looking for something to do?
Nope. Nope.
So are we, making up our mind between two choices still? And we are gonna make a ruling today and request that he go for a writing, or defer making a ruling today. Have the executive director make a writing to this, the pre-decision, and then have that circulated. We'd have the other one circulated as well, but.
It seems to me, and I haven't heard you say it, but it seems to me we have a consensus there's a violation. I think the next step is to say, what's the penalty? What are we gonna impose upon Mr. Freeman for what he's done and, or quite frankly, not done?
I agree.
And are we talking about you're talking about a violation for an in-kind contribution for campaign buys? There was also discussions about other people rendering services for which there's an opinion. Are we talking about that too? He's talking about the household, or he's talking about the guy who's down there, went door to door.
I didn't find that persuasive. To me, I thought
Yeah.
the finding for me was that there was a failure to file a complete and accurate statement.
And that statute that requires.
Well, that would still be in-kind contributions that should have been in that statement, just like this is with the media buy. And that's the allegation, somebody paid for it, so you should have either spent the money or listed it as an in-kind
But
contribution.
let me use the RJ Mancini as an example. Okay, it was clear that RJ Mancini was paid for by the pretty sure he was paid for by the Ohio Republican Party.
Oh, I see.
He was on the They go down to an area, they organize, they do these link drops. They're doing it for multiple candidates, not just Mr. Freeman, most likely. Where does that have to be reported? Does the Ohio Republican Party report any part of that? Is there expenditures, or he's on their payroll? Because that came up in the evidence, is him being on the payroll or something. And
Right,
so I'm not really sure.
I think we had a W-2 which showed he was paid a grand total of like $6,000, I think.
Kids. Well, $6,000 for a period. Not
right.
for a whole year. I think there was something on there that he was making, 30-something thousand or whatever it was, but.
I think it was for the election period.
And it wasn't necessarily for this candidate either.
It was not. It's not broken down by anybody, just paid.
Right.
Right, and whether there's an obligation to allocate any of that or not, Phil?
Well, first, again, as it relates to in-kinds, you may be aware of them, but there's an obligation on whoever's paying for it to apprise you of what it is.
Yes.
So
Right.
let's, for argument's sake, let's just say the House Republican Campaign Committee was responsible for anybody that was coming down and doing those kind of things. I think at one level, the onus is on them to say, okay, here's how much we spent on your campaign, and to give that amount to the campaign committee, who then reflects it as the in-kind received.
That's
so
surely what's done.
But from the party, it would be zero since they didn't endorse him, I assume.
This is the campaign committee of the caucus.
Okay.
The legislative caucus.
right, and what the evidence showed was that the state party more or less just handed everything over to the House Republican Campaign Committee, whether it was funds, personnel, or whatever, and said, and I think they reflected how much they gave to the House Republicans in their reporting back and forth. So presumably that amount should have come from the House Republican Campaign Committee to, obviously not just Freeman, who, in this case, we're talking Freeman, but whoever. And it was paramount on them to say, okay, this is what we provided to you. And then the campaign committee reflects that in-kind contribution. Because otherwise, they don't know what the value of it is. They know there's something there, but they don't know what the value of it is until it's reflected to them by the giver, as it were.
But, so I circle back to if there's an affirmative obligation to, if you know that those services are being provided to you, does the candidate have the affirmative obligation to seek out those in-kind contributions? Why is that different than getting a big bunch of money on a media buy versus, people are out there getting paid by somebody renting services for you? Where does the obligation, I'm having trouble sort of where those lines are drawn. Is it because it's a lot of money and it's obvious that somebody paid for it, but there's obviously people helping on your campaign committee, campaign in the box?
And I'm not trying to, there may be a distinction. I've never been a politician that I wanted to be, but I gotta believe when they show up for these door knockers, it's not all people paid by the party. There are people who will volunteer.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it would be almost impossible, at least from my perspective, to delineate, okay, who's paying you, they're just showing up to knock the door and hand out literature.
But in
Right,
this
but it,
complaint,
but
there
it
were
was like,
two
with RJ
allegations.
Mancini, okay,
Right.
this was, and I might not have the testimony exactly, okay, so first of all, he was assigned and given a title as campaign manager, and everybody joked about it and everything like that, okay? He had a somewhat of a specific job, to cover this area. Now, these lit drops, I think other candidates were involved in that as well, but RJ Mancini had a title on the campaign, whether it be a real title, sort of title, whatever it is. And so, and it was obvious that he was paid by somebody else. Now, open up Pandora's box, you go back to Megan Fitzmartin, and in her testimony, she testified that she was working for 20 campaigns. I believe that was the number, 20, 22, something like that, 20 campaigns or whatever. She was a little, and I believe that all her compensation came from JPL. Somebody, I don't know if it was us, I don't know if it was Chris Evans, asked the question like, is there any allocation between the different candidates you work for? And she said no. She was like on retainer from JPL, rendering these services to all these folks out there. I don't know how practical it is, even for the candidate to be able to allocate what's my share portion. Maybe it should be going forward. I don't know.
Maybe
My
Mr. Barnes
question-
could educate it.
But and my question is the affirmative obligation to where does the affirmative obligation begin and where does it end? And when is it okay not to ask?
Well, it should be the obligation of the committee, the campaign committee, when you're doing your financial report, that you get the documentation of any in-kind contributions. It's the obligation of those entities that have given you services in an in-kind manner to give you a summary and amount of that in-kind contribution, whether it's bodies working on your behalf or whether it's resources spent on your behalf. And so both should be making sure that the documentation is given to the candidate's campaign and that the entities that are providing it in kind are putting it on their reports as well.
So to just passively wait and see if anybody gives anything to you, that's appropriate, inappropriate. Where does that obligation begin and end, and what is the time period in which it has to be done?
I wish it was more clear and that it was specified in the law who, when. Unfortunately, it's not. The obligation is still there. You have a responsibility to seek out anyone that's provided those in-kind contributions. Generally, the parties are good about sending those forms to the candidate's campaign. I can only speak for myself, but you know, that's the way they've always handled it. I've never had a caucus, so to speak, contribute. But if the Ohio Republican Campaign Committee, in this case, if they were providing services for a number of candidates, they should have sent those forms out to all of those candidates for their campaign finance reports, whether it was a pre-primary or post-primary report would be determined by the time frame of those services.
And if you're the Freeman PAC and you know that they provided you services such as RJ Mancini, and they haven't delineated that to you, is there a responsibility for you to go to them and say, I need this for my in-kind, so I'm making accurate reporting?
I would have, but I can't say whether everyone would.
And it seems to me that Larry Householder, or not Larry Householder, his son, Luke, I don't think there was evidence to the fact that he was compensated as it relates to this campaign. But as it relates to RJ Mancini, I think clearly was that he was appointed and listed to be his campaign manager and was getting paid by somebody to perform those services.
If you noticed, I was over here kind of smiling in Ms. Tavares' talk, only because of your comments about there's not a lot of specificity in the law, which there isn't. Generally speaking, I think what you'll find is, as a post-election report is coming up, somebody like the HRCC or the ORP, you know, since we're dealing with the Republican side, but I know I've seen on the Democratic side as well, they're going to be sending notices along, you know, along with reflecting in their campaign finance report as they've identified it. They're going to be reflecting, sending along a note to the campaign committee that says, this is how much income we had as it relates to your campaign committee. Because that, you know, that's what's supposed to be reported during either a pre or a post-election period. You know, and so I think that's generally speaking how it takes place. And again, I'd be loath to point a lot of fingers at the treasurer or the candidate or the campaign committee, again, because, you know, like you reference Fitzmartin working on 20 campaigns, you know, how much should have been reflected with Freeman as opposed to somebody else's, as opposed to somebody else's, as opposed to somebody else's. And so the only way it's in this particular case, I'd say the HRCC's responsibility to identify what that is and send it along to the committee. And
but Joe,
would they have done so? Yeah, probably.
On that point, there's always a discussion with the campaign committee candidate, how much assistance you're going to get from the party or the caucus. So you know in advance that they're going to provide X, Y, and Z to your campaign. Sometimes it's increased based on the activity of the election. You know, maybe that's why more money was spent on those commercials.
Right.
You know, based on where that candidate is in the polling. But there is a discussion because it doesn't come out of the blue.
And if I'm reading you correctly, it's kind of like the other, when we were talking about you get the invoice and don't do anything, you can't just bury your head in the sand and say, I know I got these services, but I don't have to do anything until they report it to me.
Was there evidence that there was a discussion about the amount of the buy-ahead? Or that it ramped up?
And if you just turn gears on me, I apologize, because I was referring more to the in-kind contributions of RJ and seeing people doing stuff on behalf of the campaign as opposed to the buys.
Right, but when you said, the candidate knows and they discussed with the candidate and you're talking about RJ Mancini and he's there and certainly there's evidence that he's there. There was also a lot of discussion about the media buys and how much, who knew what, about how much was being spent and what was being run by the candidate in terms of what was approved and not, and discussed and not.
I don't think there was any evidence to that. At least I don't recall any. He just knew that he had gone to be participating in creating ads. He knew ads were running. He knew somebody was paying for both television and radio ads and made zero effort to figure out who was doing it, how much it was, or what the amount was.
Right, and I didn't hear any evidence that anybody ran that by him in advance. Or he signed off on content, but was there evidence that he signed off on the money?
Nope.
I don't think on the money, but I guess it's a little fuzzy on, because they kept insisting that, Fitzmartin and others, that the candidate signed off on everything, that he had to approve everything. So was the question specifically asked, did he sign off on $100,000 worth of campaign ads? No, that never came before us. That question wasn't asked.
Right, to me, which relates, and I think it relates a little bit to the penalty to me. You said, yes, 290,000 is a good number, do it. And then you get the bill and you go, oh, that's not right.
And then you
That's
do
one
nothing.
thing. Now, the do nothing is, I'm with you on that, but it's the weird, that to me all relates to penalty.
And it seems a bit disingenuous to me that you participate in the creation of television commercials and radio spots. You know that the television and radio spots are running, and yet here we sit today and you've not paid a nickel toward any of it.
Right, or investigated, or
Right.
done anything.
Done anything. That's the problem I have with it.
Now, you do have issues with availability of records and sealed records and how you would get them.
Well, Mr. Hicks managed to get the spots from where all the TV ads were going.
Yeah, right?
And somebody could probably ask, if you're in the commercial, if it's your commercial, you probably ask the television station, well, who paid for it?
And how much did they pay?
And how often did it run?
Because we know Mr. Hicks was able to go get all that information.
Well,
I think it is, almost a reckless disregard. And I know, from the way I heard the testimony or whatever, I'm not entirely sure that he knew anything. Because when I listened to what the role of Megan Fitzmartin was and the role of the other gentleman that was also paid, it kind of surprised me when the other gentleman came in, the other consultant came in, one gentleman, I can't remember his name right now.
Long Street?
No. That's the other guy.
Star something?
Yeah, him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy or whatever. He came across as, with a lot of expertise and everything like that. And he also came across as if he was providing a lot of heavy-handed guidance to the campaign. And in fact, I believe in his testimony, he said he was speaking to Mr. Freeman on a daily basis, or very, very, frequently.
well, it sounds like we're going round and round on this, but, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Freeman, at least from my perspective, he participated in all those ads. He knew they were going to run on TV. He knew that. He knew how, and I'm pretty sure he knew how much money he had in his treasury. He knew he was embarking on expensive ad buys. And he didn't bother to wonder how they were going to be paid. It just boggles the mind to think that that could be a legitimate excuse that I didn't approve that expenditure. Who did he think was going to pay this? I just think, you have to at some point rely on common sense. And in this case, common sense tells me he knew he didn't have to pay for those ads because somebody else was going to. And the question is,
Yes,
yeah,
that's distinctly what I believe.
And to me, we also have to think about this moving forward. What precedent are we setting that if people who do this,
That's why I think I understand that.
is it a slap on the hand, or is this something you come before the commission having done this? We're going to take swift and strong action against you.
I think we should take swift and strong action to send the message out there that this is not something that should be happening in the state of Ohio.
Do you have a proposal?
We had talked, I think you had mentioned it, Scott, how much money he has in his campaign.
96,000 and change.
And we know at least the ad buy was well in it north of that. Is that a fair statement?
I think it was alleged it was 137,000 and change.
Well, if we're looking for a motion, I would make a motion that we find that a violation occurred.
Before you do a motion, let's have some let's have a discussion on what we think an appropriate final amount would be before we move, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I apologize for interrupting.
I was then going to add what my idea of a line would be.
Well, why don't you tell us what your idea of a final would
Let's
be?
talk about that.
Well, I think clearly because of the preponderance of the evidence that we just can't look past this. If he in fact had has $96,000 in his campaign fund at this point, and we know what the ad buy is, I would say the fine should be at least the 96,000.
Do we know what the ad buy is?
Well, 137,000 or 290,000, I take your pick.
More than 96.
Yeah, it is, no question about it.
Agreed.
But if we're looking for a deterrent rather, 96,000 is certainly a deterrent and a finding of guilt.
Well, there's also, then that doesn't account for any in-kind for services as well, which isn't, I don't think would be a big number, but it's, to me, that there should be a number also considered.
And you talking about Luke Household and
I don't think it was Luke Housel or if there was any evidence that he was compensated or those services that I heard.
The only thing was the stay at a hotel.
He's,
So then it would have been an expense for his hotel.
yeah, I just looked at Mr. Hicks's affidavit, original affidavit, and he really doesn't give any firm proof. I mean, it's speculation and yes, he was in a hotel. I think he established that, but beyond that, I'm not sure how much other proof exists out there about his involvement.
it wasn't even clear to me how much involvement was attributable to this campaign.
FYI, just looking at the Secretary of State's office, the last report filed by Mr. Freeman showed $93,773.66 as the ending balance for the annual report filed last year. Just a side note.
So it's down $3,000. I'm guessing that's probably legal fees.
And that was as of last January?
Yes. Doesn't look like
Campaign's still open, right?
campaign committee is still open. That much is the last reflected. Obviously, he would have to file presumably an annual report coming up if he didn't have any other activity in this election, which I presume he didn't. Who knows where it is at this point, but that's the last that the Secretary's office shows.
So I know we talked about this when you first opened up about what we can impose as far as the penalty, $100 per day. So we're not, at least, if the numbers were to, at least as Dennis has proposed, that would not be an issue, correct?
Well, I mean, you know, if you look, okay, let's say if you're looking at the maximum, it's $100 per day per the number of days that, you know, an inaccurate report was presumably filed, you know, an incomplete or inaccurate report. That would have been wouldn't have been the annual, hold on a second, let me see, it would have been a post-primary. Post-primary was filed in June of 2020. So that's what, about 500 days? Approximately, just, you know, thumbnailing, that's about $50,000.
I guess my proposal then would be $100 per day from the last day of the filing that it was inaccurate. It's just, it's a matter of a calculation, but I think it's, as you indicated, probably around 50,000.
Yeah, I mean, a very generalized number, maybe 60, but you know.
And let me ask you a question, I just want to clarify. So the money that's in his campaign account,
That's the campaign committee's.
okay, not the
Not
nothing
his.
else. Okay, just thank you
Yes,
for that distinction.
right.
That money can be utilized to support other candidates, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's my
Yeah.
answer to my question, okay.
So Bill, we're just talking about the 35-17-13D on the complete and accurate statement.
Correct.
And on the strict account of all contributions. And that is the charge only against the treasurer. And are there two separate fines associated with the charges? Do you get charged on each count, or how does that work?
Jim, say that again?
Well, there were allegations of 3 violations,
Right.
right? One was improper corporate activity, which we were, I think, as a commission, felt that that was not really somewhere that we were leaning. But the other 2 was failure to file a complete and accurate statement. And you're saying that's $100 a day.
Correct.
And then there was the charge of under 35-17-10D2, which was strict account of all contributions from whom received and purpose.
Right.
So if you find a violation of each of those, is it $100 per day per violation?
I was about to look up anything related to 10D2. Okay. 10D2, easy for me to say. The specific provision under 10D2 says the treasurer appointed under Division D1 of this section shall keep a strict account of all contributions from whom received and the purpose for which they were distributed. So it really points the finger at the treasurer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna get the rules. It's sandwiches and chips.
Sandwiches hot? While you're looking at that, can we go off the record for 5 minutes, Phil?
Oh, why not? Because I mean, it's just gonna take me some time to just look up.
Yeah.
On the record for 5 minutes?
Well, there's lunch. So.
No, might as well, you know, sandwiches are warm.
Yeah, are they warm? And Chris is like, yeah. I'm like, okay, just take a break then. Yeah.
I'm just,
Dole out. Dole out for lunch.
I'm not certain what all's in the bag, Phil,
Phil
the
ordered.
order and.
Phil ordered
It's the
What
standard,
a disclaimer.
there's like ham, turkey,
just.
roast beef, and veggie. So I mean, that's what's in there.
I'm just throwing it out.
I didn't put anything special.
and all kinds.
You're good, Thomas.
I didn't put anything
It's all
special
been-
in there.
Oh, and I'm like, little minis, it's perfect.
Yeah, they presumably probably off.
Put these over there. Here's. One for the mayonnaise. This looks like cookies.
Don't be bashful. There we go.
The guy that was preparing the order.
Oh, he was in no hurry?
No, I was like, I'm here to pick up an 11:30 order, it was 11:50, you know, by the time I finally talked to him, I'm like, he's working on it.
Chris, do you have plates somewhere?
So that's.
Maybe down in the cafeteria? I'll go look.
Let me check,
Unless
I
Mike
think
wanted-
the,
One napkin, if you see any napkin.
I'll look down at the cafeteria.
and I forgot to pick it
Oh, we need more. Yeah, that was going down.
You feel, it's only in the hotel, so you feel.
I'm hoping for a cookie that doesn't have chocolate in it.
Oh.
Stuff a lot of in it.
Okay.
Chocolate and I do not get along together very well.
Oh.
And I'm just saying that when you go to a restaurant or anywhere, 90% of all of the dessert have chocolate.
That's true.
And I can understand why, because my husband is an absolute chocolate lover. I get it. Look at that, non-chocolate. These guys, I thought it was gonna, yeah, I thought it was gonna be raisins, but I'm closer to down the chips and not,
Eames to go.
not. We have a vegetarian choice for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's vegetarian in there, I know that.
Salt and vinegar, it's a New Orleans style. And mesquite barbecue.
Nice.
Really?
It was interesting.
Okay then. Yeah. It's a conference. Good thing.
Well, you were in a better place.
You said,
Andy Partey. You can start recording.
There's a stack of napkins.
Did you like that, Tom? Regular flavor.
What a difference.
Are we gonna do this?
this is a problem.
I think so.
You know, and it was.
That's scary.
I'm just waiting for her to come by now.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Good. Yeah, I think you're fine.
And we were talking.
I was looking for like a private tip video. Yeah, I think the video is still running. Just.
Yeah.
Slide behind you both. Go with this.
There's a book written on it.
Sakes.
Can you stop it?
I don't know what. We'll get one first.
There's.
Chris, we need a pause on that.
Oh, what?
For the video or.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Sorry.
Putting-
I was able to grab a stack of those napkins.